Hi, this is Annie Grace, and welcome to This Naked Mind podcast. And I'm here with Meade. Hi, Meade. How are you?
Hey, great to be here. Thanks for having me.
I'm so glad you're here. So I can't wait to hear your story. I would love if you could just take us sort of back to the beginning for you, like your first drink. Where did alcohol sneak into the picture?
Sure. So I grew up, I had a very normalish childhood. I grew up at the beach, and I would say that part of the beach life is everybody kind of works hard during the week, and on the weekends we get away to the beach and unwind. So from a very early age, we spent a lot of time on the weekends at the beach. My parents with a cooler full of Miller Lite, relaxing and unwinding, and us kids running around and playing. And it was a wonderful way to grow up, looking back. And, my household growing up, it was very normal. I had an older brother, and my parents were, I would say it was a little tense in my house. I'm not sure they were very happily married. And it definitely, I was a natural born feeler. I felt things very deeply. And so from a young age, like a natural empath. So from a young age, I really learned that my heavy emotions and my feelings kind of weren't going to cut it in an already kind of tense house. I had a friend when I was little that when I was 5, and she had spina bifida, and I would go to her house for play dates, and I just remember so vividly wanting so badly to play with her walker, to literally feel what it felt like to kind of walk in her shoes. Um, so part of my story really revolves around this natural feelingness that I have. And growing up in that tense house, I learned that it was something that wasn't going to cut it. So I was sent to my room a lot when I was crying, and nobody knew why. And I developed this ability to I figured out that the way to make it was to lighten the mood, and enter a room and figure out what everybody needed, and to be light and easygoing and funny. There was a car trip that we took every summer down to Georgia, and it was tense. And I remember making a joke, and it was one of those early memories of, I got my whole family to kind of, the mood was so much lighter because I made a joke and everybody laughed. And it was one of those like early feelings for me of, I've just kind of, won some hard subjects over. And that theme kind of continued throughout my life. Fast forward to high school, I was a very social child. My brother was gifted academically and athletically, and so my social became my kind of route, if you will. And I tried alcohol in my early teens. I don't really remember exactly when, and I didn't like it. It was awful. It was hard to swallow. It tasted awful. But shortly thereafter, going to the beach by the day with my friends and taking wine coolers, then heading home to shower and head back out for the party, wherever it was. I quickly learned the magic ability, if you will, of how alcohol could allow me to be what other people needed me to be, which was, again, light and funny. And it gave me a sense of being able to maybe fit in. So it was something that, though I didn't like it at first, I was like, ooh, this could work. Of course, all of this was subconscious, going on, but and looking back, it's very easy to see how it kind of all threaded together. But I was a good kid. I made good grades. I ended up senior class president at one point, and gave a speech and developed that, again, that reinforcing that wooing, kind of winning others over personality. So that continued on into to college. I went away to a big school, and people say, "Oh, you went to a party school," and like, aren't they kind of all? I mean, all of them kind of are, right? And so that's where the drinking, all this time too, even through high school, the drinking never looked any different than anybody else. It wasn't anything crazy. It's just what we all did. It was the same into college. I joined a sorority. There were plenty of, opportunities for social events, and they all, revolved around drinking, going out to get drunk. I mean, that was kind of our mission in those days. So right around the fall of 2000 was when kind of a tough season came up. My parents were getting divorced. My grandfather had just lost his battle to melanoma, and my mom was diagnosed with leukemia, all within like a 6-month span of time.
Wow.
I'd just been, so gone are the fun, light, easy days, right? Just kind of floating through life as party Meade. But I was the president of my sorority at the time as well. And it just ended up being just too much all at one time. And it was my first known, I was living in the sorority house at the time. And as the president, you got a room. I mean, it was tiny. It was like the size of a closet, but you got your own room where all the other girls, shared 4 or 5, there were 4 other rooms and 4 or 5 girls per room. So I was in this, room by myself and surrounded by people, but it was definitely one of those times where I had, despite being around so many people all the time, I mean, I felt very alone, and, a lot was going on. So it was my first known time of really using alcohol and food to kind of numb that experience and escape all that was kind of going on behind the scenes. But yeah, I mean, I gained 30 pounds. In like a month, I got a 1.1 that semester GPA. It was not a good time. I definitely developed some unhealthy relationships, but fast forward to ending up with an amazing therapist who kind of pulled me out of that time and really, helped me not feel so alone and helped me process what I was feeling. And that was the first time, I think, too, that I really was able to understand what I was feeling and that it was okay to have feelings. I mean, having said that, like, I have to preface this with, too, like, my parents are lovely people, and, they did the best they could, and, no hard feelings whatsoever. But it's interesting to see how, like, our childhoods, kind of our perception can shape who we become and how we, operate in life. So anyway, great therapist, made it through that. My drinking continued, but it was more normalish again, like back to being the same as all of my my friends. Ended up graduating with honors and kind of turned it all around. And this is definitely one of those times that I would look back on later and say, okay, I definitely was using alcohol as a numbing agent then, but I was able to pull it together. So I can't have a problem. I was able to kind of come out of that. If I had a true problem, if I was an alcoholic, then I wouldn't have been able to pull myself out of that, right? So moving on beyond college, I got my dream job in pharmaceutical sales right away, and the winning other people over really continued. It was the most amazing job. I loved it. I had all these, social opportunities, and the culture was work hard and play hard. And, we had national sales meetings in Vegas, and I used to think it really was I used to think, why did they keep throwing all of this, free alcohol at us and then expect us to get up the next morning so early and then work hard? And I wonder if it's some kind of test, like, can we hang? And hang I did. I mean, I can be what you need me to be. So I was able to accomplish hanging with, the good old boys club, but, the group that needed to be able to be seen at the parties and whatnot, and then still get up the next morning and do my job. At this time, I moved back to the beach, and again, that kind of like beach lifestyle where, if you're at the beach, like, day drinking was a thing before it was, before it was a thing, it was a thing because we lived at the beach. So if you were at the beach, it was okay to have a beer or whatever, any time of day. And so living there definitely kind of I can see now how that kind of conditioned my belief that alcohol was part of, a necessary part of relaxation. But anyway, sidebar there. I met my husband at a beach party, and we spent those pre-kid days, partying. I mean, that's what we did. That's what everybody did. And then we moved to Atlanta. He took a job in Atlanta, and we were starting a family. And this was a time that I also starting a family. I had a little, we had trouble starting a family, and I had to refrain from drinking in order to get pregnant. And that there was never a hesitation or is this going to be hard? It was just what I had to do. And again, another time that I would cite in life that, okay, well, I mean, I was able to give it up for that. And I was able to give it up, subsequently for all three of my pregnancies without any issue or temptation. So my drinking looked very, very normal. Once I had the first two babies came, and I became a kind of accidental stay-at-home mom since we moved to Atlanta. I had to quit my job for my husband's job to move. And since we were struggling to get pregnant, start a family, it just kind of I became an accidental stay-at-home mom. And this was, the beginning for me of, okay, I need social, where do I fit in? Where do I belong? And so I joined some moms groups, and that was my first experience with like the mommy wine culture and what that was. We would have these morning play dates where whoever was hosting would serve the coffee to take us up, get us through the day. Like, we can do this, ladies. We can, mom so hard today because we've got our coffee and our, going. And the afternoons even too, we would have coffee at play dates. But then, sometime after 4:30 or 5, if we were having an evening play date, it turned into wine spritzers as the beverage of choice. So we would drink our coffee to get us through the day, and then get our wine to, bring us down at night. I'll say too, a lot of those wine spritzer play dates were, minus the spritzer. At a certain point, it was kind of, who even needs the spritzer? Let's just have the wine. But this is a time too where I also was very in control of all the things. And I was very aware of the fact that I never wanted to, put my children in a position where I was driving after drinking, or so it's one of those times where I felt like I definitely had control over it. Although there was this, this rub just kind of really starting to brew, where it didn't really quite align with what what my goals and what my intentions were for being a mom. But more on that later. So that was kind of the social, world that I was in then. If my husband and I would go out, for a date night, or if we ever got away for a weekend, we definitely had those times where we overdid it, and we would come home from those weekends away and almost need another break. It's like, that old saying, like, we don't get out much. And then so we get out, and then we would overdo it. And so that was adding to kind of that tension that was starting to kind of like, oh, I don't know, like, the wine's not really serving me, but I have control over it. So we're good. Fast forward to a couple, more tough seasons. We almost lost one of, my middle child has a heart condition, and we almost lost him at one point. And the stress of his illness and dealing with that, I think that was a time that I had to be on guard, and I was able to kind of really prioritize, okay, like, this is getting in the way. So, or could get in the way. So let me just push this aside, and let me focus on what I really need to do here, and keep him, healthy and safe. And then with baby number 3, eventually, that was another tough season, where the same kind of thing, where my drinking, wine got in the way of me being able to make sure that they had, what they needed. And so it was again, another time I could look back and be like, well, I kind of, I was able to push it aside, and, I didn't need it then. And especially those were some really tough seasons, not unlike the tough season that I had in college. And when I did use alcohol to numb, and that was also one of those times where I'm like, well, look at me. See, I'm not using this. It was a time that I could have, and I didn't use alcohol to get through a tough time. But eventually we were in an area where we had some social opportunities, but anyway, we didn't have a neighborhood where the kids could run and play and do all that. So we decided to move further out, and we ended up in this great neighborhood where it's just a bunch of kids the same age as my kids, a bunch of people the same age as us, and the social opportunities just came and came and came, and everything involved alcohol. At this point it was becoming such commonplace to have it, even at church functions, and not on site, but even church get-togethers and Easter egg hunts and whatever the social gathering was. Alcohol was just always part of that. And we're both very social people, and I fell kind of back into that old party Meade mode, and I really kind of liked having this. It was exciting that I had this kind of social life again that I thought served me so well before. But shortly thereafter, it wasn't long before it became something where that internal tension that was kind of starting way back was really starting to accelerate, where there were the mornings that I would wake up not feeling great, and then I'd be snippy and irritable, with my kids the whole next day. And I hated those days. There were the evenings that, we stayed out too late or kept the kids out too late. And then there was the guilt and the shame that came along with that. But all this time, our drinking, my drinking, it still didn't look anything. It didn't look different to anything, to anybody else's. And I didn't even know anybody who didn't drink, really. I'd heard about like friends of my parents, like growing up, that were, so-called alcoholics, a few people here and there. Those are the only people I'd ever heard of who didn't drink. It's just this world we live in where it's just a part of all these occasions, and it's just there. So there was one night where my 4-year-old, I went in to kiss her like I normally did every night, and she stopped me and she was like, "Ooh, Mom, your breath stinks." And she said, "It smells like wine." And yeah, and it was one of my first reaction was, wait a minute, did my 4-year-old just call me out for drinking? And then it was, ouch, like she doesn't want me to kiss her because I smell. And she could very clearly identify what that smell was. And that was a moment for me that I think, in the when I had time to process it and I was being really honest, like that hurt. And it was just further fed into that tension that I was feeling, that like, I wanted to be present with my children, and I wanted to be, a good mom and spend time with them. But I was feeling this kind of just pull, maybe, that my values weren't quite aligned. I valued relationships with my children and my husband, but this was just something that was becoming, just starting to kind of get in the way. Right around this time, my youngest went to school full-time down here in Georgia. They have Georgia pre-K, and so they start school full-time. And very soon after she started school, I decided that this would be the perfect time for me to resume my pharmaceutical sales career. And, you know, in hindsight, I look back and I'm like, I was completely just trying to avoid the panic of now being alone and not being needed during the day. My kids are off at school all day. I mean, we did have obviously financial goals, and the plan was for me to always go back to work. But it was a very like kind of knee-jerk reaction to, oh, she's in school all day, nobody needs me, I need to be needed, let's jump right back in. And I had these grand visions of what it was back in my 20s, right out of college, when I was, you know, meeting all these people. I'm such a people person. I'm so others focused that I was excited. And it was, you know, very quickly I realized that, you know, my expectation of this amazing experience that it was going to be, it was, you know, it wasn't. That transition from stay-at-home mom to full-time working mom was brutal. The company I worked for had some unrealistic expectations of what we, you know, of what we should be doing. Me being the people pleaser that I'd always kind of been, which, you know, I used to kind of claim as a strength that I'm a people pleaser, so hire me. And that people pleasing, you know, I continued to kind of kill myself in the job to look good in the job and get the sales and do that, but definitely at the expense of my family. You know, at this point in my life, I had just discovered the Enneagram. That was something that was introduced to me, and it was something that kind of launched an intense personal growth journey where I was kind of looking at my type. I'm a type 2.
That is very telling. Yep.
Yeah, doesn't that fit?
Lots of people pleasing type 2s.
That's right. Yeah, and that need to be needed, and that feeling of if you're okay, then I'm okay, which all of that aligns so beautifully with being a mom, right? You know, the self-sacrifice and that doing for other people. And I think especially as a stay-at-home mom, it was a very easy kind of role to play. One day, one of my close girlfriends, she was like, you know, she asked me just kind of on it. She's like, "Who is Meade?" And I was like, "Well, what do you mean?" And she's like, "Who is Meade?" I'm like, well, I'm a mom, I'm a wife, I'm a daughter, a friend, a pharmaceutical sales rep. And she's like, no. Like, I'm not saying, like, those are your, you know, those are your roles, those are your hats. Who are you? And I'm like, well, I don't know. Like, I don't know how to answer that question. And it was definitely the start of this intense, you know, the Enneagram kind of helped me kind of see exactly how this all played out for me and developed into the life, you know, the personality that I was operating from behind all this time. And that was hard to kind of like wake up and see. But this was when I was, you know, previously, I would say I was definitely kind of just sleepwalking through life, doing what I needed to do as a mom to meet the needs of everybody, and you know, self-sacrifice, and just go in that hustle, and caught up in that world. And this was a time that I was kind of starting to see that slowing down and waking up and disrupting that just autopilot mode, although hard to do, it was amazing too. And at this point, I still hadn't pieced together it didn't even dawn on me the role that alcohol could be playing with all of this, because that internal tension I was feeling, it was starting to, you know, grow. And it wasn't until, I guess, you know, I was in the job, and I used to never drink during the week, very like health conscious Monday through Friday, you know, exercise and healthy eating and all this stuff. And then on the weekends, it was a different story. And so there was some, you know, disjointedness there with feeling like I was kind of one thing during the week and then another thing on the weekends. But when I went back to work, it was definitely becoming this thing where through this, self-awareness journey, I was becoming more intentional and more present, and through a deepened faith and prayer, I was definitely up leveling my life, if you will. But only until 5 o'clock, when I would get home and I would pour that glass of wine that I felt like I had earned, I felt like I deserved. It was, my reward for having performed all day. I felt like, being in sales, it kind of ends up, for me anyways, it ended up feeling like, at the time I was doing it, when I was going through this self-awareness journey, which can be intense, I had days where I didn't feel like being chipper or bubbly, but that doesn't really work in sales when you're not chipper and bubbly.
Right.
So I had to kind of, put on the shoes and dance. And that started taking a toll on me. And then feeling like I wasn't meeting the expectations, even though my sales were good. I really felt like, I was just sucking at being a mom. I was, everything, I was just falling short of all the things. So wine became my reward at 5 o'clock every night. And that's when too, I felt this like, okay, I'm up leveling my life, but only until 5 o'clock. And then I'm not present. And even though it was only a few glasses of wine, every night. So again, another time that I would go, well, but it wasn't excessive. I wasn't drinking bottles and bottles of wine every single night, but it was enough that I was, having moments where I was rushing to get my kids to bed so that I could go back downstairs for a second glass, or I was skipping. Bedtime with my kids was my most favorite time, as no matter what else happened during the day, no matter what else was thrown at us, we could all just, snuggle up together in the evening and read and have that time and pray together. And there was nothing better than that time. And this was a time where I was choosing, wine essentially over that sacred time. And that's when it finally kind of clued in. I was finally clued into, okay, maybe this internal conflict wasn't so much about just not being awake and not being, present as much as I want to be, or not being authentically me. Maybe there's more to this, maybe there's another piece here. And it took a while for me to really kind of admit that. And it wasn't until one day I just, at this point, I started thinking about what would life look like if I just got rid of alcohol? But that didn't even seem like, a possibility for me, because, what about my social world? How is that going to suffer? What about my relationships? How is my church going to view me when they think, or see that I have this drinking problem? Because at this point I'm thinking, if I want to become alcohol free, my only two options are AA and rehab, because that's what they do in the movies. It's, someone has, they realize that they have a problem with drinking. And so then, they go to AA or rehab, they're forced to go. They have a rock bottom and then they're really forced to go. So I couldn't even wrap my head around how this even would be a possibility for me to live a life in a world where alcohol is everywhere and everybody drinks. And especially for someone that loves that social belonging, there's no way I can do this. So I sat with that for a while, very discouraged, thinking, well, I'm just, I can continue drinking somewhat miserably. Yeah, it's fun for a few minutes, right? The first 15 minutes, you feel like it's amazing. But after that, it's all, it's not fun at all. There's nothing fun about it.
Yeah.
especially when it starts to interfere with those things that you do love so much, like bedtime with the kids. So I felt very stuck, and I thought that my only, I could continue drinking miserably, or I could, try not, or I could quit drinking and try every single day trying not to drink, but be miserable doing so. So there was a point where I thought, okay, well, I'm going to be miserable either way, right? Like those aren't great options. And this is when I, out of desperation and out of just not having any idea what else I could do, but thinking there has to be a better way, I literally one day just got down on my knees and I started praying for a rock bottom. I thought, a rock bottom that wouldn't hurt anybody, but I thought that maybe that's the missing piece here, that I haven't had a rock bottom, and my drinking looks like everybody else's. So maybe it needs to accelerate. Maybe I need to hit this rock bottom, and then I'll be forced to one of, AA or rehab or whatever the options are, and then I'll be free. And I'm so happy and pleased, obviously, because, I got something much better than a rock bottom. I found your book through a conversation with a neighbor. It was, it was so divine too. And it's one of those, things that seems like chance, a chance encounter, but that it definitely, this was meant to be. But a neighbor friend of mine, he and I had always talked about how, alcohol interferes with our fitness goals, both being big exercisers and that kind of, we'd always talked about how, gosh, it kind of stinks that you feel so great on Friday, you feel fit and healthy and wonderful from the, the week. And then Monday morning rolls around after the weekend and you feel gross and not healthy and not fit. And so we'd always talked about that. And he said, I heard about this book. He said, it's called This Naked Mind. And he said, and I said, oh, well, tell me about it. He goes, I don't know. I haven't read it yet. He said, but I heard about it. He said, but be careful, because if you read it, you won't ever want to drink again. And I kind of looked at him and I was like, isn't that the point? I mean, I was so excited because I was like, yay, here is my better way. Here is the better way that I've been looking for. And I immediately downloaded it on Audible. I mean, literally within 5 minutes, and listened, to the very beginning with you and your vulnerability and your relatability straight from the beginning. It was, I have chills just thinking about how profound it was for me, because it was the first time too that I felt like I really wasn't alone. And, for a girl who has spent her whole life being very social and being very others focused and always being around people, it's kind of crazy to think that I spent a majority of my life maybe feeling alone. And then with the drinking, it was something I felt very, very alone in, that, I didn't fit with the traditional idea of what a problem drinker was. And I wasn't a social drinker. And it showed me how, there was a point where I was kind of angry at first, because I felt like I'd been duped, the societal conditioning that alcohol isn't harmful, and even sold to us in ways that it's even beneficial. Mm-hmm. And, thinking about that and the conditioning that, through nobody's fault. My friends and family, they don't know what they didn't know, and I didn't know what I didn't know, but learning this, seeing the science and the research, which was so important to me as someone who, very, I value the kind of the medical side of things too. Seeing that all come together, it truly was just that. It was so amazing. It was amazing. And I held off reading that last chapter for a while, because I was so afraid that, and I continued, like you said, I continued drinking, kept going. And I think that was that permission to not, immediately force this stop drinking thing, that permission that you give us in that book, that was huge because it allowed me to find choice in this, you know, path for me. And so I held off reading that last chapter because I was so afraid, like, what if it doesn't work on the others? You know, like, what if I finish it and then it doesn't work? But eventually it was natural. I finished it, and I chose December 1st as my, you know, start of my alcohol-free journey. I had one last hurrah the day before with my favorite wine, and the next day I woke up and I never looked back. It was incredible, and yeah, I mean, it was amazing. So, and it's been amazing ever since.
That's so awesome. That's so awesome. I loved when you were talking about like internal tension, and that being, I was actually just this morning, I was being interviewed for Elle magazine, and she asked me this question. It was, what do you define a problem? Like, how do you define a problem with alcohol? And I said, you know what, there's a lot of external people that can make a lot of external judgments on what's happening in somebody's life. But for me, I really would say that I would define it as a problem when you start to feel of two minds, when you start to feel that internal tension, that where you both want to do more and less of something at the same time. And you get basically in a fight with yourself, and you are at a place where you stop trusting yourself and you stop really believing yourself because you're not sure. One day you feel one way, the next day you feel another way, and you introduce this duality and this like lack of unity inside yourself. And for me, like, that was the point of the problem. And interestingly, externally, it didn't look like a problem. And I think that people can go much further too, where externally it looks like a problem, but they haven't reached that point of duality where they're just like, no, this is still good. Like, I'm still fine. Everything's good, which, maybe that's denial. I don't know. But I think that though is kind of the litmus test. If you're in your own mind saying, I both want to do more of and less of this at the same time, I'm not at peace with my decisions anymore. I think that is where it just really pays to pay attention to what's happening, in your mind and in your heart.
That, and that is so true. And that, I think that was for my journey. I think that's why I had to have that intense kind of self-awareness part of it beforehand, so that I could eventually listen to that and figure that piece out. Because there was a lot of time that I spent going, I'm so in control. I'm a smart, educated person. I'm so in control of all these things. I have this great life. Everything on the outside, looks amazing and normal and fine. But there was just this internal rub, for me, it manifested in this, and it manifested in this kind of edge and this irritability that, despite, wanting to show up more presently and more intentionally, it was always kind of keeping me distracted and pulled. And it's how you talk about how after you become alcohol free, you can experience that euphoria that some people, I did. I mean, I have in my journal every from day one. And I kept saying in my journal too, after each day, I'm like, I have this euphoria. Surely it's not going to last. Like, I'm sure it's just temporary. I was trying to like prepare myself for like, that it wasn't, like maybe the pink cloud syndrome that people had talked about. And then, you were the one that pointed out for me, that it's that euphoria comes from that decision that you've made finally. And that was the biggest piece for me. It's like, I woke up on day one alcohol free, and I'm like, I can breathe for the first time, because I've made my decision. I know that this is the decision for me. I know that this is my truth, because it comes from me. I'm not relying on anybody else to tell me, which also, as a people pleaser, as a others focused person, all my life, that was some external validation was something that was big for me. So if I'm looking at what are the guidelines for, am I an alcoholic? Well, I don't really fit in that. So, okay, so I'll just keep going. But no, but there's something, but you have this feeling, the stuckness. It's been so amazing. And this work you're doing is so huge, because I feel like there's so many of us that do exist in this, like Jolene Park calls it, the gray area drinking, where you're not a social drinker and you're not an alcoholic. And that was one thing too, is even if I was an alcoholic, I didn't want to identify with I'm a shame-based person, being a type 2 feeler as it is. I don't need something that's going to produce more shame and more, so anyway, so this work that you're doing to kind of reveal this gray area drinking kind of experience, when it's a problem for you, that's when it's a problem for you. And that's when you have options and you have choice and you have freedom on the other side of that choice. I think, and peace and joy. And I mean, it's been just, aside from and I had taken breaks, I had done weight loss cleanses and I had done dry Januaries, but I had removed alcohol temporarily, but I didn't remove my thinking about alcohol. So I was still, wanting it or missing it or thinking about when I could drink it again or when this cleanse is over. So I was still distracted. I was still being pulled by it. It was still getting in the way of what I valued, which was being, fully present and forming deeper relationships with, my family and with God and all the, so it definitely, eliminating the alcohol is one thing, but then eliminating the thinking about it and the energy spent worrying about, did I eat enough today so that I am not going to feel miserable tomorrow when I have, 3 glasses of wine, or I go to the party and I, have too much, or that freedom from the mind is really what's been huge. And it makes all the difference in the world. And that's what has led me to this place where, oh gosh, it's been amazing. It's been amazing. And it's led me to, my next right thing, which for me was so my, when I was in pharmaceutical sales, and I was miserably doing it, they laid off the entire sales force last fall. And so my plan was, come this January, after get through the holidays, and then in January, I would look for another pharmaceutical sales job. And one popped up and I turned it down, to join your coaches training with, this Naked Mind Institute. And it just was, I've never looked back. It's been amazing. So
great. Oh, I love it. So
one good thing to the next, to the next, to the next.
What a powerful story. So, as a type 2 and as a people pleaser, how have you found it socially? Have you gotten pressure? How have you navigated and dealt with it?
It's crazy, because I really feared, not being able to maybe go to the social events and not still having the friend groups and all of that. And, some relationships have changed, but I would say for the better, in that we can kind of exist on a deeper level now. But I go to, all the social functions still, and I'm just the one that's there not drinking. And at first it was a little strange. I think people were kind of like, well, what's up with this? Or is it gonna last? But I don't have a temptation. There's no desire to drink, so I don't feel tempted. So I'm very confident in I can answer questions about it if people want to ask. But I find most people really kind of, after the first time they see you not drinking when you've previously been drinking with them, they kind of get over it and move on. Yeah. So I my idea of what an alcohol-free life would look like meant missing out on all those social opportunities, or not wanting to go. And that hasn't changed. That's been really cool. I just leave earlier now.
That's awesome.
Which is great, because then I get my sleep and I get what I need, which is sleep. And yeah.
Yeah, like very happily, peacefully leave earlier. That's just great. Well, this has been so awesome. So let me ask you the question that I always ask kind of at the end. And congratulations on everything, especially becoming a coach. It's super exciting. It's been so great to get to know you throughout the program and brainstorm with you and all sorts of things. But the question at the end is, if you were going to go back and talk to yourself when, during the ups and downs, and I'd say really when you were starting to feel a lot of that inner tension we were talking about. And by the way, just another word on the inner tension that you touched on that I think is worth repeating is that inner tension works on both sides, right? So you can be drinking and not liking yourself for drinking, or you can be not drinking and you can be sad and feeling like you're missing out and not as happy and joyful in life because you're not drinking. And both cases of it, in my opinion, are problematic because both instances create that inner fighting, which is not pleasant. And so there has to be kind of a third way of actually aligning what you want with your, like what you want logically with your actual emotional desires, which of course is the whole premise of This Naked Mind. But I think that on either side of it, it is like maybe not equally as problematic because when you're not drinking, you're hopefully not, having some of the results of drinking in your life. But it is still, I believe, problematic for a few reasons. Number one is because you still are fighting with yourself. You still aren't 100% comfortable in your own skin. And number two, because, there's a lot of evidence to say that when you're hanging on like that, when you're not doing something that you really desire doing, you won't last all that long either because you just aren't aligned. You aren't fully on board. There's a big part of you that still wants to be drinking. And so when people do report that they've changed their desire to drink, then they come to this place where, yeah, like you said, social life becomes kind of a non-issue. People just let it go because they aren't just kind of thinking they're doing you a favor by letting you off the hook because they know you want to anyway. They're like, oh, she really doesn't want to. Okay, well, moving on, sort of thing. So anyway.
Yes, so true. So true.
So what would you go back and tell yourself, Meade, about your life now if you could go back in time?
Oh my gosh. How long do we have, right? I think the biggest thing I would say is, taking that pause and, taking a break from the doing and just being will give you the answers 100 out of 100 times. Just, worthiness is in just the being, love is in the being, and, all the rest of it, it's not worth the freedom and the joy and the peace and the life. It's this side of things is a place that I never thought was possible. And for a long time, I didn't even really know that I was even striving for, it's like, let's survive motherhood. Let's just get through and it's the hustle of kind of just making it day by day. But on this side, it is so much more than just surviving. It is everything it's the ups and the downs and the beauty of all of that because, it's amazing.
It's awesome.
And I think about like my wine cooler thing that has, bottles of my favorite wine in it as we speak. And I walk by it a million times a day and I never thought it was something but just kind of changing that desire and aligning with what you do desire is everything.
It's so great. I love it so much.
Yay.
Well, thank you so much. This has been just so fun to get to know you.
Thank you.
Oh, it's just been awesome. Hi, super exciting news. So the Alcohol Experiment book is being released, actually got released just a few days ago with the expanded edition. What does expanded edition mean? It means that every single day throughout the book, there are deep reflective journal entries that have been added with space to write, which is so cool and so exciting. So you really make it your own. And the reason I did this is because I truly believe that the deepest wisdom you will access throughout the 30 days of the alcohol experiment comes from within you. You know more about what's best for you than anybody else in the entire world. And I know sometimes that can be hard to believe, but when you really access your own wisdom, it is so profound. So you can pick up your own copy at alcoholexperimentbook.com and check it out. It's really powerful. And as always, rate, review, and subscribe to this podcast, as it truly helps the message reach somebody who might need to hear it today.